Hello to you all out there, broadcasting from Nebraska City, Nebraska. Welcome, and thanks for joining us for our newest edition, the ninth podcast, I do believe. Ninth of a weekly series to discuss the Lewis and Clark expedition. This podcast is being produced and presented by the good folks at the Missouri River Basin Lewis and Clark Interpretive Trail and Visitor Center in Nebraska City, Nebraska. The focus of the podcast is on the journal entries for the current week, so we can see exactly what the Corps of Discovery is doing in 1804, 05, 06, the years of the expedition as it set out in return to St. Louis. The language used in this podcast assumes that the listener tuned in to the prior podcasts and therefore has some background information in mind. You can find us on Facebook by searching MRB Lewis and Clark Center, and check out our website at lewisandclarkvisitorcenter.org. We are located along the Missouri River, along the route of the expedition. We have 3 floors of Lewis and Clark themed exhibits, walking trails, and a Plains Indian Earth Lodge replica. September 26 to October 2nd, 1804. Starting the week among the Teton Sioux, very cautiously. Last week ended with a confrontation with the Teton Sioux. The two parties nearly came to blows. The situation was finally diffused by Black Buffalo, chief of the Tetons. The Corps of Discovery had wanted to continue on by this point, but the captains agreed to stay one more day to help defuse the situation even further, so that the women and children of the Tetons could come up and see the boat and the men of the expedition. That was the reason given to them anyway, and they agreed. Clark has a rather lengthy entry on this day, the bullet point being the Sioux trying to further delay the expedition to stay around another day or two. I will now read a series of excerpts by Clark and then commentate on those. Captain Lewis and 5 men went on shore with the chiefs, who appeared to wish to become friendly. They requested us to remain one night and see them dance, etc. In the evening I walked on shore and saw several Omaha women and boys in a lodge and was told they were prisoners lately taken in a battle in which they killed a number and took 48 prisoners. About 5 o'clock I was approached by 10 well-dressed young men with a neat buffalo robe, which they set down before me and requested me to get in. They carried me to the chamber tents forming 3/4 of a circle and set me down between 2 chiefs, where they had about 70 men seated in a circle in front of the chief. 6 feet square was cleared and pipe of peace raised on forks and sticks, under which was swan spread down, scattered the flags of Spain, and other we gave them was displayed. A large fire was made on which a dog was cooked. We smoked until dark, at which time all was cleared away and a large fire made in the center. Several men with tambourines highly decorated with deer hoofs and rattlesnake assembled and began to sing and beat. The women came forward highly decorated with the scalps and trophies of war of their fathers, husbands, and relations, and danced the war dance, which they had done with great cheerfulness until 12 o'clock, when we informed the chief that we intended to return on board. They offered us women, which we did not accept. I saw 25 squaws and boys taken 13 days ago in a battle with the Omaha, in which they destroyed 40 lodges, killed 75 men and boys, and took 48 prisoners, which they promised us should be delivered to Mr. Dorian, who was now with the Yankton. The overall encounter today is more of a typical sounding council than the day prior, when things almost came to blows. The smoking of the peace pipe, the ceremony of it all, a better first contact for both the Corps of Discovery and the Lakota people. And yes, they did eat the dog. it would not be the last time either. Also, Pierre Dorion is mentioned here. Recall that he was left with the Yankton. It seems clear that if he had been with the party on the 25th, that he would have been the perfect liaison to smoothen first contact among the two parties. John Ordway on this day describes the overall friendly manners of the Teton Sioux today. Patrick Gass describes him as peaceful and kind. Joseph Whitehouse used the phrase peaceable and kind twice in his entry at varying points in the day. So the scene is very positive. If the reader did not know of the near disastrous confrontation of yesterday between the two parties, the reader would be left with a very positive impression of the social intercourse between both parties. The 27th starts with the banks of the river being lined with men and women of the Teton to watch the Corps of Discovery. Clark says the chiefs requested them to remain one more day to allow the remainder of their nation to arrive and see them. He writes, "After a delay of half an hour, I went with them on shore. They left the boat with reluctance. We suspect they are treacherous and are at all times guarded and on our guard. They again offered me a young woman and wish me to take her and not despise them." He goes on to say, "At midnight, I, with two chiefs, was in a pirogue going on board. By bad steering of the pirogue, struck the cable with such force as to break it near the anchor. Captain Lewis and 3 or 4 men on shore. I had all hands up and was compelled to land. The chief got alarmed and alarmed the Indians, who the first chief and about 200 men came down in great haste, armed and ready for action, and found it was false. About 20 of them camped on shore all night. This alarmed Captain Lewis, and Wells myself viewed as the signal of their intentions, one half on guard. Our misfortune of losing our anchor obliged us to lay under a falling in the bank, much exposed to the accomplishment of the hostile intention of those Tetons. Pierre Cruzet, our bowman who could speak Omaha, informed us that the night that the Omaha prisoners informed him we were to be stopped, we shew a little signs of a knowledge of their intentions as possible, all prepared on board for anything which might happen. We kept a strong guard all night in the boat, no sleep." The next day on the 27th they awaken, have a couple of chiefs come and go, the chiefs again insisting that they remain until others arrived. The captains have no plans of doing this and finally set off, unexpectedly, to the Teton Sioux. Clark writes, "Soon after we saw a man riding full speed up the bank. We brought him on board and he proved to be son of the 3rd chief. By him we sent a talk to the nation, explanatory of our hoisting the red flag under the white. If they were for peace, stay at home and do as we had directed them, and if they were for war or determined to attempt to stop us, we were ready to defend ourselves, as I had said before. Came to a small sandbar in the middle of the river and stayed all night. I am very unwell, I think for the want of sleep." John Ordway describes several hundred warriors lining the banks, some with firearms, some with bows and arrows, and some with spears. He says all but the cooks slept on board that night on the sandbar, ready for anything. On the 29th, several Teton followed them upriver, intending to do so until they reached the next band of Teton Sioux. The captains refused to let any of them come aboard. Once again, they camped on a sandbar that night. On the 30th, Clark writes, "At about 10 o'clock we anchored opposite the camps of this band and told them we took them by the hand and sent to each chief a carrot of tobacco and some to the principal men. Said that after staying with the band below 2 days, to see them we had been badly treated and should not land again, as we do not have time for such delay. On October 1st, they make 11 miles and camp on a sandbar. Clark says it was very cold and windy that day. On the 2nd, Clark writes, "We observed some Indians on a hill on the south side. One came to the river and fired off his gun and asked us to come aboard. He wished to go to his camp near upstream. We refused, passed a large island on the starboard side. Here we expected the Tetons would attempt to stop us and prepared for action. Opposite this island on the larboard side, a small creek comes in. We called this Caution Island, camped on the sandbar a half-mile from the main shore." So ends the week, the Corps still very cautious, headed upstream. Tune in next week to see how they fare with the Teton Sioux. September 26 to October 2nd, 1805. The entire week encamped with the Nez Perce near modern-day Orofino, Idaho. Many of the men of the expedition are sick from eating nothing but salmon and camas roots. Their diets were not used to this variety of food, or lack thereof. They were hungry and famished, and without much food the week prior, so they gorged themselves and began to have major digestive issues once they were exposed to bounty of salmon and camas roots by their friends the Nez Perce. On the 27th, all men were at work building canoes. Clark writes, "Very sick, nearly all the men sick. Our Shoshone Indian guide employed himself making flint points and for his arrows. John Ordway refers to the trees as 5-pitch pine trees that were fallen to make the canoes." On the 28th, Clark writes of men sick, "Nearly all men complaining of their bowels, the hunters killing no game." The entries on these days are incredibly short by all 4 men keeping entries in this period. It appears they were struggling even to write. On the 29th, Driar killed 2 deer. On the 30th, 1 deer is killed. The week ends in a similar state. There is not much interaction mentioned with the Nez Perce, but the little morsels that are mentioned are positive ones. Minor trading occurs, and many are engaged fishing. The week ends with some feeling better, others not feeling better and being described as very sick. And this is where we'll pick up the story next week for 1805. September 26, 1806. The Corps had arrived back on on September 23rd they arrived back. The last journal entry was made by Clark on September 26th, which is just one line saying that they are still writing letters. A final note on 1806 for the week. Upon returning to St. Louis, Meriwether Lewis wrote to Thomas Jefferson, saying, on September 23rd, 1806, Lewis wrote, saying, "It is with pleasure that I announce to you the safe arrival of myself and party. In obedience to your orders, we have penetrated the continent of North America to the Pacific Ocean, and sufficiently explored the interior of the country to affirm with confidence that we have discovered the most practicable route which does exist across the continent by means of the navigable branches of the Missouri and Columbia rivers." That concludes the podcast for this week. Thanks always for listening, and tune in next week.